A burned-out widower left his daughter's school recital early, and the woman who quietly drove him home that night was the last person he expected to change everything. Declan Merritt had not cried in 4 years. Not at the funeral, not at the empty house after, not even on the nights he sat in his daughter's doorway, long after she'd fallen asleep. Watching her breathe like that alone could hold his world together. He had learned, somewhere between grief and survival, that tears were a luxury for people who had someone to catch them. He had a company to run and a 7-year-old named Lila who still believed her dad was the strongest man alive, so he kept that belief intact. He kept everything intact. He had become very good at holding things together that were quietly falling apart. The night it all shifted, he hadn't planned to leave early. Lila's school was hosting its spring recital at the Worthington Community Center, a modest building on the edge of downtown with folding chairs and a banner that never quite hung straight. Declan Merritt, CEO of Merritt Capital Group, had arrived 10 minutes late in a town car, still on a call. He sat in the back row. Lila spotted him from the stage and waved so hard her headband fell off. He waved back and smiled the way he always did, the practiced smile that looked like the real thing from a distance. Then his phone buzzed, the Singapore deal. The one that had been circling for 3 months. The one his board had been breathing down his neck about since February. He stepped into the hallway, then to the parking lot. Then somehow he was in a car again, telling his driver to take him back to the office. He didn't even make it to Lila's number. He didn't hear her sing. He realized this 3 blocks away. He stared at the back of the headrest and said nothing. His regular driver, Miles, had gone home sick that afternoon, which was why the car that showed up at the Meridian office tower at 11:14 that night, after the Singapore call finally ended, after the follow-up calls, after a glass of bourbon he didn't taste, was a Rideshare. A silver sedan with a pine air freshener and a small stuffed elephant buckled into the front seat cup holder. He got in without looking at the driver. "Heading to Birchwood Hills?" the woman asked. "Yes." She merged into traffic quietly. The city was wet. It had been raining since noon, the soft, persistent kind that turned streetlights into smears of amber and white. Declan looked out the window and let himself do the math he'd been avoiding all night. Lila's recital had ended at 9. She was already asleep. Her babysitter had texted a photo of her in dinosaur pajamas, curled into the corner of the couch, program still in her hand. He had read that text 4 times and responded to none of them. "Were you at the concert downtown?" the driver asked. Not chatty, just a question. He looked at her in the rearview mirror. She had dark hair pulled back, a face that was paying more attention to the road than to him. A small badge clipped to her sun visor read, "Certificate Pediatric Aid, River Oaks Clinic." "No," he said. Then, for reasons he still couldn't explain later, "I was supposed to be." She didn't respond right away. She changed lanes, checked her mirror. "School thing, my daughter." She was in the recital. "How old?" 7. She nodded once, just once. And somehow that nod said more than any condolence would have. Like she understood the exact weight of that number. 7 years old, old enough if to look for you in the back row, old enough to remember you weren't there. Declan hadn't talked about Lila to anyone in months, not really talked. His assistant asked about her the way people ask about the weather. His board members knew he was a widower the way they knew the square footage of his office. It was background information. Context. "She had a solo," he said. The driver glanced in the mirror. "Did she know you weren't there?" "I don't know. Maybe. She waved at me earlier. Then she knows you came," she said. 7-year-olds remember the waving more than the leaving. Declan looked at her again. She was watching the road. There was no performance in it, no attempt to comfort. Just a statement, the way someone might say the rain looks like it's letting up. "Do you have kids?" he asked. "A daughter, Rosalie. She's 9, does she?" He stopped. He didn't know what he was going to ask. The driver waited a beat. "She's used to me missing things," she said. Not with bitterness. Just truth. "I work 2 jobs, sometimes 3. She's learned that when I do show up, I'm really there. That counts for something, I think." A pause. "I hope it does." The rest of the drive passed in quiet. When they pulled up to the gates of his house, Declan reached for his door handle, then stopped. "What's your name?" he asked. She glanced back at him in the mirror. "Vera. Vera Solis." "Thank you, Vera." She nodded once more, that same single nod. And he got out into the rain. He stood in his living room for a long time that night, still in his coat. Lila's bedroom door was slightly open, the nightlight casting a soft orange crescent on the hallway floor. He stood in that light for a while. He didn't go in. He just stood there. On the kitchen counter was the recital program. His housekeeper must have printed one for him. The front had a drawing of a treble clef done in crayon, and Lila's name was listed third in the second act. Lila Merritt, you are my sunshine. He sat down on the floor, right there in the kitchen, still in his coat, and read her name until the letters blurred. He did not cry. But it was close. 3 days later, he found himself at the River Oaks Clinic. He had told himself it was routine. He brought Lila in for her annual checkup, something his assistant usually scheduled and his housekeeper usually took her to. But that morning, he'd canceled 2 meetings, moved a conference call to the afternoon, and driven Lila himself. She had been delighted in a way that made his chest ache. Vera Solis was in the hallway when he walked in, a clipboard in one arm, holding a juice box out to a small boy who was refusing it with magnificent stubbornness. She was wearing scrubs the color of soft sage, and she was laughing at something the boy said, not a polite laugh, a real one. She saw Declan. Her face shifted, not to recognition exactly, more like the careful recalibration of someone trying to place a memory. The drive to Birchwood Hills, she said. Yes. He nodded. My daughter Lila. We have an appointment. Vera crouched down to Lila's level immediately, the kind of ease that only comes from doing something long enough that it becomes reflex. Hi, Lila. I'm Vera. I like your shoes. Lila looked down at her light-up sneakers. They blink when I stomp, she demonstrated. Excellent, Vera said, completely serious. You should always know that about your shoes before you commit. Lila laughed. Declan watched this exchange with something he couldn't name. His daughter did not warm up to people easily. She had been shy and careful since her mother died, the kind of careful that broke his heart a little every time he saw it. But she was already following Vera toward the check-in desk, chattering about the sneakers. He filled out the paperwork slowly, buying himself reasons to stay in the waiting room. When Vera came back through with a stack of folders, she paused by the chairs where he was sitting. She's great, she said. Really easy with the nurses. She's not usually, Declan said. Vera tilted her head. She told me she missed seeing you sing with her at the recital. He looked up. She what? She said she wanted to sing with you at her school show, but you had to work. Vera's voice was entirely without judgment. Kids that age will reshape a hard thing into something that makes sense. She wasn't hurt. She made it into a wish. He stared at her. I don't know what to do with that. Yeah, she said. That's the thing about them. They forgive you before you even ask. She moved on down the hallway. Declan sat with that sentence for the rest of the morning. He started requesting the same driver. Not every day, not obviously. He told himself it was because the rating was high and the route was efficient. He told himself this for about a week before he stopped pretending. Vera Solis drove him on Tuesday mornings, Thursday evenings, and the occasional late Friday when the office kept him past 10. She never initiated conversation, but she never shut it down either. She simply made the space available, the way a good room does, quiet enough to think, warm enough to stay. He learned her in pieces. She had moved to the city from San Antonio 6 years ago with Rosalie, then 3 years old, and nothing but a nursing assistant certificate and a cousin's couch to sleep on. She'd worked her way up from overnight home health aide to pediatric clinic staff, picking up rideshare shifts in the evenings to cover Rosalie's school fees. Her daughter wanted to be an astronaut, and Vera had found a library program that offered after-school science workshops, and she was somehow making it work. She had been married. He didn't ask. She mentioned it once, obliquely, the way people mention a scar, not to explain it, just to acknowledge it exists. He left when Rosalie was 4 months old, she said. They were stopped at a light, and the rain was back, the same slow rain that seemed to follow this city for weeks at a time. Said he wasn't the kind of person who was meant to stay. Did you believe him? I believed it was true for him. She watched the light. I just didn't know what to do with the fact that it wasn't true for me. Declan thought about his wife, Catherine. About the morning he got the call. About the way the hospital waiting room had smelled like burnt coffee and floor cleaner. And he had sat there in those plastic chairs for 4 hours, bargaining with something he didn't believe in. And then the doctor had come out, and he had already known from the way she walked. I lost my wife 4 years ago, he said. Car accident. Lila was 3. Vera was quiet then. Do you still talk to her, Catherine? In your head. Some people do. Some people say they still hear them. He looked out the window. No, he said slowly. I stopped hearing her a while ago. He paused. That's maybe the loneliest part. She didn't offer a remedy. She didn't say she's still with you or she'd be proud. She just nodded and drove, and he was grateful in a way he couldn't articulate that she understood silence was sometimes the most honest response. By October, Rosalie and Lila had met. It happened sideways, the way most real things do. Vera had a car issue on a Thursday evening, and Declan had offered, before thinking about it, to send a car for her and Rosalie so she could still make it to her clinic shift. The car had dropped Rosalie at his house, where his housekeeper, Agnes, was already watching Lila. He came home to find both girls cross-legged on the kitchen floor with a bag of pretzels between them, completely absorbed in a book about deep-sea creatures that Rosalie had brought in her backpack. Agnes caught his eye and gave him a look he couldn't read. Later, when Vera arrived to pick up Rosalie, she stood in the doorway of his kitchen and watched her daughter teaching Lila to pronounce bioluminescence. She looked at him. He looked at her. Neither of them said anything, but something had shifted, like a door that had been stuck finally giving. The photo was taken outside Merit Capital Group's lobby on a Wednesday morning in late November. Declan had walked Vera to her car. A simple thing. They had been going over the week's schedule. She'd had a folder of his she'd been holding for him, and he had walked her out because the conversation wasn't finished. His hand had been on her shoulder for perhaps 3 seconds, steadying her as she stepped over a puddle on the sidewalk. Someone had a phone. Someone always had a phone. By Thursday evening, the headlines had found their way into his inbox, forwarded by his communications director with no comment. Merit Capital CEO's mystery companion. Who is she? And Declan Merritt photographed leaving office with unknown woman. Sources close to the billionaire say she's not from his world. He read them in the back of a different car, on his way to a dinner he didn't want to attend, and by the time he arrived, 3 people had made the joke. The smooth kind of joke, the boardroom kind, where the teeth don't show. His old friend and investor, a man named Hartwell who had known him for 15 years, leaned in during cocktail hour and said, "She the new project deck. You're usually more careful about who you're seen with." Declan smiled, said nothing, moved to the other side of the room. He texted Vera at 10 p.m. "I need to tell you something. Are you free tomorrow morning?" She didn't respond that night. She didn't respond the next morning either. By noon, his calls were going to voicemail. By Friday evening, he understood. His communications director confirmed it with the careful neutrality of someone delivering difficult news. Vera Solis had deactivated her Rideshare account. She had also, his assistant informed him, called the clinic to move her shifts so her schedule no longer aligned with his standing appointments. She had not made a scene. She had not sent an angry message or demanded an explanation. She had simply and quietly removed herself, the way someone does when they have learned, many times before, that the graceful exit is the one that costs you the least. He sat in his office for a long time after that. He thought about the photo, about Hartwell's comment, about the fact that he had been in that lobby and heard nothing like what she must have heard secondhand. The jokes, the speculation, the reducing of a woman he respected into a project, a mystery, a who is she. He had not defended her because he had not known it was happening. And he understood, with a clarity that arrived too late, that this was exactly the problem. He moved through a world where the noise never reached him, and she had been left standing in it. He did not go to her apartment. He thought about it. He decided against it, because showing up at someone's door after they have quietly left is not an apology. It is a pressure. He wrote a letter instead. He wrote 4 drafts. The first 3 were too formal, too reasonable, too much like a man used to making cases to boards and investors. The 4th one he wrote at 2 a.m. on a Sunday, sitting at the kitchen table in the dark, and he didn't think about how it sounded. He just wrote, "Vera, I don't know if you'll read this, but I have to say it somewhere, so I'm saying it here. When Catherine died, I learned how to keep functioning. I got very good at it. I showed up to things and ran things and managed things, and I told myself that was enough, that keeping Lila safe and the company standing was a purpose worth having. I stopped expecting anything more from my own life than maintenance. You keep the lights on, you keep the doors locked, you don't ask for the other things. Then you told me that 7-year-olds remember the waving more than the leaving. And I don't know why that sentence broke something open in me, but it did, because it meant you understood both parts, the leaving and the staying, and you didn't judge either. I should have been more careful about what that photograph meant for you. I live in a world where the noise comes after I've already left the room. You were left in the noise. That is my fault and I am sorry, but I am not sorry for knowing you. I am not sorry for any of the drives or the conversations or the Thursday mornings or the night Rosalie taught Lila that word she still can't stop saying. I am not sorry for any of it. I'm asking for the chance to say this in person, not to fix anything, just to say it where you can hear me. Declan he sealed it and walked it to her clinic the next morning, before the doors opened, and left it with the front desk coordinator. He drove home without stopping. He did not hear from her for 6 days. On the 7th day, Lila came home from school with a drawing she'd made in art class. It was 2 figures standing under something that was either a tree or a very large broccoli. She confirmed it was a tree. And beside them were 2 smaller figures, one of whom had spiky hair, which Lila said was Rosalie. Can we invite them to dinner? Lila asked, setting the drawing on the counter with the gravity of a formal proposal. I want to show Rosalie the deep sea book, the one with the anglerfish. Declan looked at the drawing for a long moment. I'll ask, he said. That evening, his phone showed a new message, short, just 4 words. Dinner sounds okay. When? He exhaled. He held the phone for a minute before writing back, and something in the center of his chest, some tension that had been there for years, just slightly released. They did not talk about the photograph. They did not talk about the letter either, not directly. They talked about Rosalie's science workshop and Lila's insistence that anglerfish were secretly the nicest deep-sea creature because they brought their own light everywhere they went, and at some point Agnes quietly left the kitchen and neither of them noticed. When Vera finally said, "The letter was good," she said it the way she said most things, once clearly without rehearsal. "I meant it," Declan said. "I know, that's why I came." He didn't try to define what came next. He had spent 4 years defining things, categorizing things, maintaining things. He let this one exist without a category. They went to the zoo on a Saturday in December. Declan's idea, Lila's enthusiasm, Rosalie's encyclopedic animal knowledge. Vera walked beside him through the bird pavilion while their daughters ran ahead, and he realized at some point that he couldn't remember the last time he had simply walked somewhere without an agenda. "You're not checking your phone," Vera said. "I turned it off." She glanced at him. "The whole phone? That's either very healthy or very alarming." "Probably both," he said. She laughed. He watched it happen. That was the moment he understood without ceremony that something had already been decided. Christmas was Lila's favorite thing. She had decorated the living room with a focus and intensity that Declan's office managers could have learned from. There were paper snowflakes on every window, a wreath on the bathroom door, and a small nativity scene on the kitchen counter that she updated daily with characters she felt had been missing from the original story. Vera and Rosalie came on Christmas Eve. It was Vera's suggestion, so quiet and casual that he almost missed it. She had mentioned, in passing, that her usual plans had fallen through, that her cousin was visiting family in Texas, and Rosalie was fine. Really, they had their own traditions. He had said come here before she finished the sentence. They ate at the kitchen table. Agnes had made tamales because Rosalie had mentioned them once in October, which was the kind of detail Agnes collected without seeming to. The girls ate 3 each. Vera looked at the table and then at him with an expression that was partly surprise and partly something he could not name. After dinner, Rosalie and Lila fell asleep in Lila's room with the anglerfish book open on the floor between them, and Declan and Vera sat in the living room in the paper snowflake quiet, and he said, "I'd like you to stay, not just for Christmas, generally." She was quiet for a moment. "That's a big word, generally. I know I'm not going to change for this," she said. "I'm going to work my shifts. I'm going to drive Rosalie to her workshops on Saturday mornings. I'm going to disagree with you when I think you're wrong, which happens more often than you'd probably like." "I know," he said again. "And I'm not going to let Lila get attached to something that isn't real." "It's real," he said. "That's the only thing I'm certain of." She looked at him for a long moment, not softening exactly, but landing, the way something does when it decides to trust the ground. "Okay," she said, "just that. Just okay." He reached for her hand in the paper snowflake quiet, and she let him. The proposal happened in March at Rosalie's science fair. He had not planned it there. He had planned it for a restaurant, then a park, then a quiet evening at home. He had the ring in his jacket pocket for 11 days. And then he was standing in the school gymnasium, watching Rosalie explain her project on bioluminescence to 2 judges who were clearly charmed, and Lila was beside him holding a paper cup of lemonade with total concentration, and Vera was across the room, laughing at something Rosalie said, and he thought, "Here, this is it. This is the thing I didn't know I was looking for." He crossed the gym. Vera turned when she heard him coming, her expression shifting to that careful recalibration again, reading him the way she always had, accurately and without effort. "What?" she said. Rosalie looked over. Lila had appeared at his elbow somehow. He took out the small box. He hadn't rehearsed a speech. He wasn't going to. "I missed 4 years," he said. "I'd like to stop missing things." Vera looked at the box. She looked at him. "That's not a question," she said. "No," he said. "It's a fact. The question is whether you'd like to stop missing things too." Rosalie had gone very still. Lila was watching Vera with an expression of extraordinary patience for someone who had been at a science fair for 2 hours. Vera took the box from him slowly. She opened it herself. Inside was a white gold band, plain and clean, and along the inside edge, engraved in small, clean letters, "Show up anyway." She read it twice. When she looked up, her eyes were bright. "That's from the night in the car," she said. "You said you show up even when you're exhausted, even when it's hard. You said the kids in that clinic deserve someone who shows up anyway." He paused. "So do you." Rosalie made a sound that was mostly a held breath, finally releasing. Leela took a careful sip of her lemonade, waiting. Vera slid the ring on her own finger and looked at him over it. "You drive me crazy," she said. "I know. You work too much, less than I used to. You still do the phone thing in the car when you think I can't see. I'm working on it." She shook her head, but she was smiling. "Okay," she said. The same words she'd said at Christmas. The same weight, the same trust. "Okay." Rosalie grabbed Lila's arm, and both girls made a sound like a compressed celebration, and Vera stepped forward and Declan held her, right there in the middle of the gymnasium, with the bioluminescence poster behind them, and the lemonade cups and the paper plates and the humming of fluorescent lights overhead. The wedding was in June. A backyard, Declan's house, 30 people. Rosalie and Lila walked together at the front, both in yellow dresses that they had chosen themselves and refused to change. Agnes cried. Vera's cousin flew in from Texas and cried louder. Declan had written vows, then thrown them out. He stood there in the June light looking at Vera Solis and said what he actually meant. "I was maintaining things. Going through the right motions in the right order and calling it a life. And then you said something true in a car on a rainy night, and I haven't been able to stop looking for truth since. I want to keep looking. With you. That's everything." Vera didn't read from anything either. She said, "I spent a long time believing the good things were for other people, that I just got to drive past them on the way to somewhere else. You made me believe I was allowed to stop." She glanced at Lila, who was standing very straight beside Rosalie, holding the rings with both hands like they were something that could break. "You both did." Later that evening, long after the guests had gone, after Rosalie and Lila were asleep in the same room they always shared now, Declan and Vera sat on the back steps of the house. The June air was warm and still. The string lights Agnes had put up were still on, looping through the trees. Vera leaned into him and he put his arm around her. Neither of them said anything for a long time. "You know what she told me," he said finally. "The night you wouldn't answer my calls." She tilted her head up. "Leela," she said, "Dad, did you do something?" And I said yes, and she said, "Then go fix it." He paused. "She's 7. Vera laughed, low and quiet, into his shoulder. "She knew you'd figure it out," she said. "She had more confidence in me than I did." "Kids do," Vera said. "That's the whole deal with them. They believe in you before you've earned it. And then you spend the rest of your life trying to deserve it." He pulled her closer. The lights held. The night held. And Declan Merritt, who had spent 4 years keeping things intact that were quietly falling apart, finally understood what it felt like to be held together by something real.